The Secure Cybercrime podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined by information, cybersecurity, technology and talent acquisition professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives and offer advice and guidance. Our topics on this episode will include deepfakes, MFA bypassing and navigating the new phishing frontier, along with some PCI DSS. On this episode, we're pleased to be joined by David Edwards. David is the Vice President of Information Security at Payroc, a fintech leader with over 2 decades of experience and a solid academic background, including a Master's in Advanced Security and Digital Forensics. David is a lifetime learner who also holds a long-standing TOGAF, CISSP and OSCP certification. With a wide breadth and depth of experience, David has worn many hats throughout his career, and his offensive security mindset, coupled with a deep appreciation for organizational risk, has enabled him to not only consistently excel in every role he has undertaken, but also build award-winning teams while spearheading innovation. As a vivid advocate of sharing and strengthening information security practices, David, welcome to the Secure Cyber Connect podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you very much for welcoming me to talk to you. It's brilliant. Thank you.
So David, we start things off by a bit of an overview, really, a high-level overview of what we're going to discuss today, what maybe has brought you here, and just a bit of an overview from your side, please.
Yeah, thank you. So what's brought me here today really is that opportunity to share knowledge, give people some visibility of what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis, and look at those sort of key elements of taking a threat mindset to information security, but also balancing those challenges we all face in this discipline, which is governance, risk, and also making sure that our organizations can remain competitive and deliver great products to their customers while encompassing the information security landscape.
Would you be kind enough to sort of share something with us that you're proud of or excited about or just wish to shine a light on that wouldn't find on your LinkedIn profile, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as you go through your career and you transition from being very technical into sort of management and then into a leadership space, I think when you look back and say, well, what is a sign of success? And I would say, well, okay, being technical and succeeding has got to you where you are. But for me, it's about investing in people and bringing the people around me to their full potential. One of my favorite sayings, or what I speak a lot about in my day-to-day, is look around you and make sure everyone else around you is successful. That's the mission. And if I look at the organizations and the people that I work with, the teams that I've gone on to win awards, they've all been because that mentoring, investment in individuals, taking people on their journey, aligning yourself so you really understand what the business goals are. That for me is, I think, this moment in my career is what the most successful thing I'm proud of.
Right, this out.
No, that's brilliant. And from your perspective, David, what one challenge have you faced in your career that's perhaps significantly influenced your perspective on cybersecurity?
Yes, good question. So I think, interestingly, maybe by coincidence, I think there's an element of you can become complacent at the threats, and you can start to feel safe with all the technology and controls and understanding of information security you have. It can lead you to a level of complacency. And as you engage in information security, it's easy to forget that you might be closer to that front line of fraud and risk and sort of more dangerous elements of cyber attacks than actually most people around you, because you're researching it, you might be analyzing malware. So for me, when you do that, there's a risk that you yourself can be targeted. It's a risk you yourself can experience fraud. And it's making sure that my blend is that the people around you, especially the close people around you, can also be exposed by that level of risk that you're sort of carrying around your profession. So for me, emotionally, it's making sure that them lessons that I'm experiencing from being close to what is the front line don't accidentally seep into the organization or affect the people around me, because me myself have become complacent and felt that EDR technology is keeping me safe. I can't be phished by a phishing email or those sort of things that you'd never expect someone like me to become maybe a victim of. Not having that complacency is critical to being successful and helping everyone else around you, I would say. So my lessons learned are there's minefields out there that affect everybody. And I think CISOs and security professionals need to be exceptionally mindful that they can also affect you too.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And just sort of pivoting away from that, we recently read a study sent out by Capgemini, and it indicated that around 69% of organizations believe that AI is going to be essential in defending reduced cyber threats in the coming years.
Yeah.
So just curious to gain your perspective, David, in terms of how you see AI enhancing capabilities across both blue and red teaming versus sort of in the real world versus in the exercise and lab environment as such.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question when I first saw AI is, how do I embrace that? How do I get the value out of it for my team? Because in reality, the enemy is, or the adversary is weaponizing that technology today. So we're going to be proactive and invest in time and understanding how we can leverage that for ourselves. I think when you look at the whole AI space with information security, we've always been leaders in this space. Our technology, whether it be antivirus, SIEM platforms, DLP systems, have already adopted a lot of artificial intelligence or machine learning into those platforms and given us value. We're one of the few areas of any business that has actually had a big data problem and leveraged that and driven value from it from the very day one when we've brought into technologies that have already leveraged that capability. I think when you move into generative AI, this opens up some new frontiers. So currently we've been limited by tools off the shelf, but we've also been limited by problems that can't easily be solved with if, do, then, while statements, if you will. What generative AI brings to information security allows you to accelerate your team's ability to solve complex problems that typically would have required someone with more experience to deliver. And I'll give you an example in a minute. Or essentially streamline the reporting and documentation that you need in order to satisfy the fact that you're doing your job properly. So let's put that into an incident response scenario. In a typical incident response scenario, you might have to write complex queries against your EDR systems and your SIEM systems. And that is then pulling in very senior members of the team. And essentially he's leveraging a lot of their effort and time. Particularly now with generative AI platforms, you can get those platforms to build those complex queries and investigate information from a team member that doesn't have the level of experience that they would have needed. And that frees up other members of your team to then go and research stuff. Not only that, you can leverage generative AI for looking at reporting, analyzing compliance, understanding gaps. Really, it is a way of automation. I call it the most advanced auto-complete strategy we have. The only caveat to, I think, AI in terms of an enabler in terms of information security is it is prone to errors. It's not an exact guaranteed science. It has some variability to it. So you do have to make sure that you still have the base skill set and understanding of what you're looking at to make sure that what this system is telling you is an accurate indicator and it actually is taking you in the right direction. But broadly speaking, I would say from an AI perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, cybersecurity viewpoint, it definitely has the ability to make you go quicker. And if you can go quicker, that means you've got an advantage against an adversary, which is also going quicker from the opposite.
Yeah, I suppose the knock-on effect is that shortened response time, perhaps, and of course the financial reward that comes from individuals, especially senior members of the security team, dedicating their time elsewhere as opposed to being focused on this mediocre attack.
I think the challenge with AI is people have looked at it and thought, well, how do I manage AI? How do I embrace it? But realistically, you've got to step back and look for what it is. It's a well-publicized, marketable tool that is actually a third-party tool which has been integrated to solve a business problem. So one of the first questions any business can ask is, well, what's my business problem? And here is a tool that solves my business problem. It's just a third-party tool that takes input data, processes data, and then gives you back a result. So as a respect of that, you can understand the criticality of that third party and apply those traditional mechanisms. The only area I would say to proceed with caution is AI, especially generative AI, blends together logic and data in a single sphere. And as a direct result of that, protecting AI maybe on the public internet, if you have it integrated into your website, can be tricky because it has a number of exploits or known exploits associated with it that are not easily defendable from. So maybe the attack surface of the AI landscape, especially if you're integrating into your application, presents a lot of challenges that you can have to look at, and it may not necessarily be straightforward or off-the-shelf answers to that because it is relatively new. And the cyber world, in terms of, say, that defensive capability to protect it as a system, a point of input, is still maturing, I would say. So there's an element of caution, but in reality, I would say we have the tools and the skills within our discipline to embrace it and get value from it.
Yeah, makes sense. And from an attacker's perspective, red teaming is certainly an area that a lot of organizations are investing in at this point in time. How is AI sort of going to enhance that for red teamers?
So it's radically transforming red team is generative AI. There's already red team AI ChatGPT models been released that you can engage with. And to give you an idea about this is it reduces the skill set dramatically for the person who's wanting to implement, I would say, red teaming capability. Also works from an offensive, organized crime perspective. So let's give you a worked example of that so you can understand what it looks like. So it might be that I've got some PowerShell broker code, for example, so code that runs by downloading, and it's easily detectable by an antivirus system because it's a well-known piece of code. Getting something like a generative AI to refactor that code into something that looks new and different is likely going to bypass a lot of antivirus systems from the offset. Maybe not ADR systems, but definitely antivirus systems. And if that code is then put on a memory stick, it will bypass most EDR systems as well. Now, traditionally, the skill set needed to do that you would need sort of a reasonably high level of skill set to understand how does it work, how does encoding work, and it would have been time consuming as well, where within maybe 10, 15 minutes now, you can have a completely new piece of code that is reasonably unique enough to look legitimate and not a known signature to be picked up on or a known behavior to be known about. Not only that, these generative AI systems can custom make encoders that are one-off, one-time encoders for red teaming malware that essentially can deliver it. Well, in fact, in my own research, I've been managed to build a complete end-to-end code injection platform through generative AI that looked completely new. The other thing I would call out, the second point is AI has the ability to generate very realistic phishing emails against what existing scams look like. And they're very well tailored to an organization in terms of targeting individuals. So again, the original maybe language barrier or people's tailoring around targeting be custom to your organization very quickly. And again, that doesn't set off the alarm bells in people's minds because their sort of perception delta, if you will, is what we're all working with, isn't getting triggered in the same way. So this is just the beginning of red teaming. Soon automation will come along. And then as we go forward, we'll see weaponizing of CVEs done almost on the day of release because these systems can generate proof of concept code for CVEs given the CVE they've got. And we're already seeing early signs of that appearing at that sort of level of leveraging AI.
That's interesting. Appreciate you sharing your insights in that.
Yeah, fine. Well, we know many leaders, many IT leaders are saying that technical debt is presenting a huge and significant risk to their organizations. And
yes,
obviously we understand that I think around 60% of organizations are struggling with policy and process management related to technical debt.
Yeah.
What are the highest risk areas and maybe some of the best policies and procedures for managing technical debt and security vulnerability, especially in terms of policy frameworks and maybe some insight into how often you think these policies should be reviewed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So technical debt's an interesting concept, but in reality, what we're looking at is legacy work that hasn't been completed yet. And actually, a symptom of technical debt is when it becomes what I call toxic debt. And toxic debt is essentially maintenance that needs to be completed on technology systems to offset security risk. So critical vulnerabilities, pen testing results that come out from reports. Once you start to see elements like that, we're starting to get into what I call toxic debt. And toxic debt is likely to result in a security incident that's going to be material or impactful into your organization. The good news is not all technical debt is equal. It carries different levels of risk profile depending on what the technical debt is and where it lives within your organization. Now, if you look at PCI have set out recently, coming into the end of March this year, how they want organizations to look at technical debt. They've used it through the world of vulnerability management because realistically, it's not practical and in some cases not commercially sensible to remove all the technical debt out of your organization. So you've got to look at it more as, well, how am I going to treat and manage this particular challenge, which is going to continually grow all the time because systems become out of date. You can look at technical debt from a security lens like this. At your perimeter of your organization, where you're in the point of contact with threat actors who are going to look to exploit that, fundamentally organized crime opportunities. If you've got toxic debt, so critical vulnerabilities that are critical or high, especially vulnerability that has known exploits on the internet, in exploit DB, on GitHub on the internet, then you could almost be certain that eventually those criminals are going to gain a leverage in your organization through exploiting that technical debt. So that level of technical debt needs to be your absolute priority in terms of managing your resources to get there. You shouldn't be living with toxic debt on your perimeter at all. You should be removing it really on the day you find it. But realistically, you should be prioritizing resources and doing that. You could start to also layer that. So things like web exploits that are real, that can be used against you, fixed immediately. Things that are sort of not known to have an exploit, but likely to become one, do that next. Media risk vulnerabilities that are likely to require someone to have access to the system anyway, you can do that next. And then you start getting into, well, actually, maybe we take that process to things that are not internet facing. So not interfacing critical debt has to be leveraged by somebody already in your organization from somewhere. So realistically, that needs to be your second priority. And again, you can take the same for you. What's toxic? What's high risk? What's medium risk? What's low risk? By taking that you are prioritizing your resources that you have and having the maximum impact of reducing your risk associated with technical debt. And then the challenge as a business is to start getting that balance right between what resource can I afford to spend on managing that debt versus the risk that debt proposes to my organization. Because you're never going to get rid of all of that debt. You're only ever going to be able to manage a part of that debt. And some of that debt might be upgrade the platform, which takes weeks to do or months to do. So by taking this risk-based approach to it, essentially you're giving you the best chance of success, but you're removing that toxic element of it. It's that toxic element of debt, which is the piece that you really want to be taken off the table. The rest can be managed for your product life cycle.
Okay.
Review.
Going forward, where do you see the future trends appearing in technical debt management and process management for that matter? But I guess with the rise of increased automation and AI integration and DevOps and architectures and enhanced collaboration, all that stuff, where do you see the future trends in this space?
Currently, that story I've told there about understanding technical debt and managing it in that way is actually a really big challenge for organizations, depending on where their maturity of their security is. So how do you know what's risky? What is actual toxic debt anyway? You can't just rely on CVE score from the Microsoft Patch Tuesday, for example. Where I see the evolution going is we're starting to see products appear on the market that take this approach to looking at vulnerability in technical debt. So what they're able to do is look at your organization's infrastructure, and a lot of their retail organizations are doing this already because they've got loads of tills and all sorts of stuff. And they're looking at that information and they're saying, well, look, based on all this telemetry data we get in from your organization, all these agents essentially, they're able to automatically work out which debt you've got is technical. And by targeting maybe this platform over here, which you might not necessarily have noticed, by treating that, you're essentially de-risking a vast majority of your infrastructure. So the first trend we'll see, and we're starting to see, is AI being driven into technologies that can go out there and work this problem out for you in an automated fashion. And this is beyond your traditional vulnerability scanning. This is systems that can understand lateral movement, understand your network, your identity platform, and your patching processes, and come up with a risk score. These platforms will be really important, and we should invest in them because generative AI is taking toxic debt to a level where your runway of treatment isn't going to be 1 month or 2 weeks. It's going to be a few days because they're going to be able to weaponize these vulnerabilities very quickly. For your response time, your reactive time to treating toxic vulnerability needs to be very quick. So you need to be able to do that almost in an automated session with DevOps. You need to be able to have those test environments to test those patches. You need to remove the human factor out of your patching process and automate that process. But you also need to know what to patch in order to minimize the amount of effort it takes to get it done. So 2 key points there is combining network identity and vulnerability. You start being your risk assessments combined with good threat intelligence. The second piece is automating that response time so that you're not relying on human beings to go out and do that patch, but you still have the level of confidence that the changes you're making are going to disrupt and bring your systems down and affect the availability of the platform. So it's a big challenge, but the future is that becomes more automated and the technologies are starting to be able to enable it to happen.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And sticking on the subject, also PCI DSS 4.0 is something we see a lot of organizations in trying to introduce at this point in time, and we want to sort of focus on that a bit further with you. So for our listeners that perhaps aren't familiar with that, could you explain what PCI DSS is and why the updates are important?
Yeah, so the PCI standard is a standard which organizations who processing card data, so debit, credit cards, have to meet a minimum set of security requirements to demonstrate that they're keeping that data safe and secure. It's really important because credit card theft, it's not personal data, directly allows criminals to monetize and then drive organized crime. And organized crime on the internet might feel a million miles away, but it actually does affect your communities and the people around you as well. So it's a really important standard that you must meet. The reason why the changes happened is the PCI standard hadn't radically changed significantly over a number of years, but the way criminals now look and try to deploy and take advantage of weaknesses in systems has. So the standard needed to catch up. A big change in the landscape of, I would say, criminals now have adopted is the way our technologies have changed with cloud is we're not all behind castle walls anymore. We use AWS, we use Azure, we use Salesforce, we use Snowflake. Lots of companies are embracing these cloud platforms, which are really integrated into the way they operate. So our castle boundary is no longer a set of firewalls surrounded by the series of technology. It's actually really down to your identity and ensuring that your identity is tied into what you access on the internet. So really, we need to pivot away from firewalls. They're still massively important. Networking is still a critical foundational capability, but we need to start paying more attention to the identity problem and how the identity of an individual is starting to access the network or that web service. So what the big changes with PCI, and there are many, we could speak out this for extremely long time, but I would say where the PCI process is changing is some critical parts. The first one is risk-based approach to what you're doing. So the PCI have also recognized that by giving you a very direct, I want you to do this, might not necessarily be an advantage if you're pushing the frontier of information security. So they're giving you flexibility to be a bit more, shall we say, ambitious in your security controls. So maybe doing things in a non-traditional way. The second thing they've done is they've put a stronger focus on identity to make sure that you're not just logging onto a VPN and accessing the payment system. They realize that maybe just a corporate VPN, especially with home working, isn't going to be the answer to every problem. So you really need to know who's accessing that card system. Who is it at that moment when they connect into it, and what risks do they propose? So that's the second piece they've done. The also piece that they've talked about is in the traditional way, people did vulnerability management by scanning their systems. And what the PCI Council have said is, well, look, we know that you can't see all the vulnerability on your system because you're not logged onto it. So actually, maybe 90% of your vulnerability is not even visible to a vulnerability system. So what they've made sure you do is to log on and then see the vulnerabilities within a system. So now you see the whole attack surface that's available to an attacker, which is why that understanding what risk that proposes is really critical.
There's been a change, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a change to the vulnerabilities in terms of how they're categorized as well. I think I was reading somewhere that the older version mandated them to concentrate on there's high risk, high level risk. Has there been sort of a tweak to that in terms of severity level? What should be focused on in terms of vulnerabilities?
There's been some changes. In reality, they published a standard 4.1, actually, 4.01, which did roll back some of those recommendations, actually. Essentially, Essentially what PCI is saying is you've got more visibility to your vulnerability because you're doing authenticated scanning, you've got a bit of vulnerability of your code and what you're using. What they've had said is, look, take a risk-based approach to it. So just because the CVE says critical doesn't mean it's critical. It could be on a back-end system somewhere that's locked away, and hardly anybody gets access to that system, where your web server might have a critical vulnerability, CVE. That's a really big problem. So the first thing they've said is, well, take a risk-based approach to prioritizing your vulnerability, which is building on what I said before. The next piece that they've said is you have to fix your critical vulnerabilities within a fixed amount of time. So they do give you timescales to fix stuff. The piece which they didn't change, which we shouldn't be confused with the standard, is the vulnerability. Depending on how many cards you process in a payments world, you have to have a third party to sign off the fact that you fix these vulnerabilities. You can't mark your own homework. We call this ASV scanning. ASV scanning, if you don't have it right, if you miss one, you lose your certification. It's one of the few things that if you don't do it properly, the certification is revoked from you. So in that space, that's remained the same, and you still have to fix your high, your medium, and your critical vulnerabilities in your ASV scans, which is basically your perimeter scan. But when it comes to your authenticated scanning and your networking scanning, you can take what I'd say is a risk-based approach to that. But essentially fixing the critical is a must-do, fixing the highs is a must-do, the mediums need to be done at least within the next 12 months. The lows, you can take a risk-based approach to that. Now, I'm not saying never fix lows, but if you look at your resource profile, if you ask me, where do you want to spend that resource? Well, I'd fix the critical ones first, then the highs, then the mediums, then the lows in that perspective. So be ambitious, fix everything, but let's remember that realistically, it might not be practical to do that. And that's why the PCI is saying, well, look, we want you to know your complete 360 view of vulnerability and then to take a prioritized approach again.
Yeah. And what other ways can organizations perhaps ensure to stay in state whilst taking advantage of that flexibility?
So one of the biggest areas organizations should invest in, many don't, is threat intelligence. It's very basic form. Threat intelligence is saying that person accessing my website is not a legitimate person. He's coming from a known IP address that's related to a scammer in some other country. If you know that, you can immediately do something about it. So taking in good intelligence and integrating into your monitoring is a critical step. The other piece you can do as well is to take threat intelligence around vulnerabilities and know which ones are in malware, know which one are used by criminals, know which ones are in rootkits, know which ones are on the internet for everybody to go and look at on GitHub, know which ones are on the GitDB, know which ones are for sale in the dark web. If you know that, and you can link that to your vulnerabilities that you have in your collection, you know which ones are really bad. And so if you've got one of them on the internet, that's a problem. And that gives you if you imagine that gives you a distinct advantage, because currently you might have 1,000 CVEs all saying critical, but only 10% of those might actually be getting used in the wild. So now you know where to go and fix them first, because that radically reduces your exposure. So pulling in threat intelligence is the way to go in terms of understanding how you're going to prioritize and get things done, and give you a bit of an advantage in terms of what your attackers are doing. And obviously you can expand the threat intelligence even more and say, well, how are my suppliers affected by threat intelligence? Which one of my suppliers might essentially experience attacks? And you can expand that bubble again and say, well, what are my competitors experiencing? What type of attacks are they getting? What organized criminals and groups are interested in me and people like me? And now you can start to tell your EDR, your scene platforms, your detection rules. You can start to tailor yourself for the type of things that you might to expect, because you almost know what is coming at you, notwithstanding what I would say is the standard run-of-the-mill stuff that you're always going to get. So incorporating a threat intelligence strategy, even if it's just a small amount, into your overall InfoSec strategy gives you an advantage, and that's worthwhile investment. But often people rely on the EDR platform out of the box, on Scene Tool and the automated rules out of the box. If this is just autopilot, this is autopilot information security, and it isn't necessarily going to give you the level of knowledge you need in order to really be proactive and prevent incidents from occurring.
That makes sense. And I think the sharing of knowledge certainly is important. Most of the organizations that we communicate with and engage with that show perhaps more mature security state are those that leverage threat intelligence or their own network and communities, of course.
Yeah, well, actually, building on there. It's right. In a basic sense, with threat intelligence, even at a basic starter, you can get free feeds from sources like AlienVault, which you can directly inject into your scene platform, which will give you alerting linked to known bad IP addresses for absolutely nothing. So there's also free things you can go and look at as well. It doesn't always have to be premium.
We've even seen some of our partners partner actually with universities and utilize some of the researchers there, because they're on the bleeding edge in many opportunities, in many cases.
Yeah.
Just focusing on PCI just a little bit longer. Just curious to get your perspective in terms of how companies can best apply PCI when it comes to cloud encryption rules, and what are common challenges perhaps organizations are facing at this point in time.
So the way PCI works in encryption is really interesting, and it's definitely an area that PCI have got right. So firstly, get the basics right. Number one, any traffic that goes over any network that is not in your control or not trusted should be encrypted. So over the internet, implementing encryption in terms of that protocol, absolutely foundational, should be done, should be working, should be right. The cloud platforms like AWS and Azure build encryption in mind. So they built it into their platform, which is a really smart move. And actually this lines up really well to what PCI says. So what PCI says when it comes to encryption is, you can't rely on disk encryption alone anymore. Attackers don't work that way. What they do is they compromise credentials and log onto the platform, and then they log onto the server. And of course, that server can see everything unencrypted because it's only the disk underlying system that's encrypted. So this is a bit of the only level of protection that encryption is giving you is if someone walks into a data center and takes out a disk, well, you lose it in the post. So this level of encryption is not really actually doing anything against the threat that you're actually trying to defend from. So what PCI essentially said was, well, look, when it comes to really sensitive data like card data, and they're explicit on card data, what they're really saying is that local accounts on a system, so if I logged on as the administrator of a system, should not be able to see that data unencrypted because that administrative account on that system does not need to see it. Really, the service account or the identity that's accessing that system, only that account should be able to see the data unencrypted. So what PCI is really saying is you've got to apply logical access control or an RBAC type strategy so that when that application looks at data, that data is encrypted unless that particular user that's accessing that data, even if it's, say, a service user, that policy would apply to that user. And natively, cloud systems do this natively by making machines identities and then linking those services with running in within the cloud so you can implement policy and apply it to their underlying systems. So I'll take Azure, for example, allows you to implement managed identities within their systems, then allow you to access underlying the encryption systems. So MS SQL database, for example, running in the cloud will natively allow you to enable encryption at the service layer. And then you can apply that in the cloud policy to the machine using the cloud built-in capability. So that machine service account accessing encrypted data is applying that level of capability natively out of the box. So cloud systems are more advanced at delivering encryption in a manageable identity-based way than, say, a machine just sitting in a data center that's running in sort of a standalone mode with some local accounts trying to access data. That's a more complex problem because attackers will attack the bot, privilege escalate, then laterally move through the service accounts. And while the new standard is not foolproof in terms of it's still a lateral technique, attacker has to work harder to get to the data, which means they're going to be detected more easily. And that's the whole point, make it harder defensively. So hopefully that answers your question on the cloud piece.
Most definitely.
We want to discuss 2FA solutions. I guess the resilience of 2FA solutions against AI-powered attacks. So we know around 50% of companies that experience a lot of 2FA bypass attempts, and AI is increasingly being used to exploiting these vulnerabilities. And then we know this because I think a lot of the data is called direct from Microsoft, and so clearly highlights the challenges we're all facing going forward. What are the best methods for ensuring that organizations' current 2FA solutions are resilient against these latest bypass techniques, particularly with the rise of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll break that down into understanding the shift in 2FA bypass first, and then we'll look at the solutions available to organizations to strengthen that. And there are a number of options available. So one of the most radical shifts this year in the attack surface has been targeting 2FA. And the reason for that is a lot of organizations have backdropped their security into the Microsoft Authenticator app or Google app and so on. We talked before about identity is now the new castle walls around us. So attackers have had to radically change the way in which they look to say, well, how do I bypass this 2FA? I mean, imagine what would happen if you could roll back 2FA and basically make it not as good, just remove it from the attack surface. It really takes us back several years to almost a pandemic level of phishing level vulnerability. This is exactly what has happened in 2024. So what has happened is the commercialization and the technology for bypassing 2FA, it not only is here, it's now accessible as a service. You go and rent these systems. And essentially the way they work is this. You'll receive a phishing email that has a link and it will say, and it could be from someone you know, and it'll say your latest invoice is here. And you'll click on it and it'll take you to a website, and that website will immediately redirect you somewhere else. It does this to get past your content filtering system so that URL doesn't look bad. What happens next is you're then presented to log in, and this could be a Google login, it could be any type of login that's from a mainstream provider. So let's say you're a Microsoft user, it'll be a Microsoft login. It will look correct, but the URL will be different. You'll log in to this URL, and then it will take you where you need to be. And it might actually be the invoice you're expecting, might actually be the invoice. So it looks legit, but you never logged in. What you did is you logged into an attacker system, and then the attacker system logged in on your behalf, and then almost sort of is proxying your authentication data. So now the attacker is accessing that system, not you, but he's completely transparent. It's like looking for a lens. You can't see it really happening, especially if you miss that initial bit. What the attacker will do next is they're logged in as you. You've probably done a push notification to get to that data. And what they're really doing is adding additional authentication criteria to your account. So they're probably adding a new telephone number. They might be registering a new mobile phone in your account. They've got your login credentials because you had to type it in through their system. So now they have not only got your current active session, which might log in for a very long time, they've also added factors that they can come back and reuse later. And the next thing they're going to do is go and email everyone in your inbox to everybody else with the same type of attack from you and say, hey, come in and log in and pick up your document. So what we've got is a scenario that is able to essentially steal your session and log in on your behalf where you're actually interacting with at that moment. And you're very unlikely to notice, or even the most astute professionals might not notice that it's even happening because it's so legitimate. And this is what we've seen in 2024. So if that's the problem, how do you solve it? And there's a number of ways to solve this problem. Firstly, if you're using Azure, got Azure PT, it's a slightly higher subscription model, but it allows you to inject conditional access policies or take a more aggressive risk-based policy approach to your authentication. And you can link those risks to your security team so you can have a better, more visibility of whether that login is risky or not. And on the P1, you can't make challenge decisions very easily with the P1 version. It'll tell you it's risky, but it won't do anything. But in the P2, you can. That's sort of the first level of defense you could go down. There are other platforms out. There's a really interesting platform called Silverfort. Silverfort's interesting because it allows that risk-based authentication to apply not just to your Azure cloud service. It also works on hybrid AD systems. So you can apply that level of thinking not only just to the cloud, but if someone's got that credentials or logged onto the VPN with that session, then accesses a server, it's able to apply the same level of risk-based thinking. The next sort of level, or that is pretty advanced level, the other level you can go to is what we're called phishing-resistant MFA. Now, phishing-resistant MFA, for as long as it lasts, is basically applying something that can't be easily bypassed. So this could be a certificate installed on a laptop, which means that laptop needs a certificate. The attacker steals your credentials. They don't have the certificate on their laptop, therefore they can't log in. So they've got to have compromised your machine to use your credentials. Another thing which is popular is YubiKeys are interesting because you can just plug them into the machine. You can have them on a keyring. You can tap them against your phone. And basically this is saying, well, I want you to give me this physical element to it, to tap that key, which then essentially is making sure that you are the person you are logging in with that particular key. The good thing about YubiKeys is they're not just limited to your company devices. People can use them at home. They've been registered with the Google account, so they maybe have a bigger blast radius because I assure you attackers will not just target company accounts, they'll also target people and their personal accounts as well in order to get leverage. So YubiKeys are really useful from that perspective. They don't fully defend from the session hijacking perspective. So from that viewpoint, that's where that risk-based piece comes in, where if you can do step-up authentication to say, well, this is a bit risky, I'm going to do that step-up authentication, which requires some of that non-phishable authentication material, then the attacker may get a session initially, but they're not going to be able to sustain it for an elongated period, because in reality, we don't want long-lived sessions, so we shouldn't have sessions for a very long period of time. I mean, each organization's got their appetite on that. But in reality, we want to make sure that people are being prompted for credentials, especially if they access a system that they didn't do. So they log onto the email from a country where you can't be, and that's got a risk score because they're going to come back and authenticate eventually. Then you can say, hey, well, I'll always check your YubiKey for that, and therefore they're not going to log in. So in order to evolve with the threat, just relying on the standard 2FA you've got today is probably coming to the end of its resilience in reality. And you should really be thinking about your securing strategy to go to a more phishing-resistant MFA combined with a risk-based approach.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in having that sort of further, even fourth factor of authentication. Unfortunately, we've seen some organizations in most recent times sort of implement two-factor authentication, but attackers are sort of getting around that because they're prompting to sort of just reset via email, which some organizations have got that on the front end. Which is obviously causing a challenge, so they're not really sort of doubling down on enforcing that two-factor authentication.
Well, you're right. So the problem with all these things is there's an element of self-help and supporting people where someone's lost the phone or they've got a new phone or they've forgot the password and they lost the password. One of the other things that I recommend doing as well is separating out administrator accounts so they're not the same account as your day-to-day accounts. It requires some administrative overhead, but let's say you're logging into a system which is a sensitive system. Don't log in with your corporate account, have a separate account for that. The reason for this is that account's not linked to your email. It's not linked to your Teams and your whatever it is, your Google, whatever that might look like. So when that session is stolen and hijacked, you all they're going to get access to is maybe their day-to-day internet and email systems. They're not going to get access to sensitive applications. So by separating out privileged accounts and managing them differently with a higher risk strategy than normal accounts, you're going to give yourself another level of defense. I mean, nothing's unbreakable. There are many factors and human beings are in the system. So there's always going to be there's always going to be a strategy and a compromise. For defenders or security professionals, the question we want to know as well is, has that person's behavior changed in sort of UBA, that's something like Silverfort brings? Have we got the correct risk score and got the correct challenge? And have we got an alert that we can look at where we can follow up on to say, well, I might just check that because Joe doesn't usually log in and use PowerShell on that machine to that machine on a Sunday or even on a Monday, to be fair, with his day-to-day, does he use PowerShell or PSXZ? So the other key point there is don't just think identity is linked to logging onto your login and username. It needs to be also applied to protocols that allow administration, that also allow lateral movement.
Well, thank you for the insight, David. It's been truly fascinating and hugely insightful. And I think we tend to sort of look at the back end of these recordings and episodes with a few cursory questions, maybe a few quick fire questions that where you kind of have to answer. Or the controversial you have alongside, and maybe you're a challenge to the all that you think maybe deserves a bit more attention out there.
Well, that's a good one. I'm going to have to think about that for a moment. My view is security is probably not controversial, but I think one of my observations in our profession is you don't always get the priority right. It's very easy for a CISO to take a compliance standards maturity capability approach to delivering cybersecurity against a number of frameworks out there to demonstrate that they're improving security and that they're safe. The problem with that is unless you really understand the threat you're defending and take a security-based approach to it, you're not safe. So my opinion on this is compliance and governance and regulation should not be informing your should not be directing your security strategy. It should just be informing it. And you should most often be looking at your security posture and looking at that compliance and thinking, well, I've got some minor changes to make to demonstrate that. But in reality, I was already doing it. That said, We can't always meet compliance 100%. If we implemented all the regulatory and everything that was going on, it would be really challenging. So we should always recognize that we're on a journey and that we'll have improvements to make. But always take a security-based approach. Don't hide behind compliance and framework to demonstrate that you're safe.
Well, effective communication with C-suites clearly vital for any transformation projects, and we all use analogies in life, especially within the cyber industry. We've asked all our guests really what their go-to analogy is for simplifying technical concepts. And while we're at it, do you have a favorite analogy in general?
Yeah.
You can use on the podcast.
Yeah. One of my sayings is cyber fitness. And what we need to be able to be is cyber fit. Now, the reason why I use that analogy is because fitness is different for everybody. Your level of fitness that you want to have and aspire to be is unique to you or the organization you're with. So the question I would ask is, well, are we cyber fit to the level we want, to the level of fitness we've had? The other question I would say as well is fitness is not something that you do just once over. You've got to go to the gym. You've got to have a healthy lifestyle. It's a way of living. So by applying that analogy of, well, we have a level of cyber fitness, we're investing in that fitness program and we're working to maintain that level of cyber fitness within the appetite what we want. And that's a really straightforward way of sort of translating what would have been a risk conversation into something that I think that has a low cognitive sort of load to understand that, hey, what is our level of cyber fitness and what does it look like and where are we in that particular story?
That's brilliant. And what advice and guidance would you perhaps give to those that are looking to enter the industry or develop their skill set in the offensive security side of things?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. Firstly, is where are you in your career? So if you're coming out of the university at the beginning and you're getting into your first job, you're going through the time of your career where you're going to be massively technical. As an industry, there is a trend to giving a higher technical sort of credibility with regards to the number of certifications you require. Rightly or wrongly, that's just the way the world works. So as you start off in your career and you're specializing, whether it's be SIEM or penetration testing or whatever it might be, targeting and equipping yourself with some certifications along your journey is going to really make sure that as your experience grows, you've got that level of benchmarking associated with what good looks like, so you can convince either your promotion that you need or your next employer that you're bringing something that is going to be, they are going to be able to leverage with an element of guarantee straight away. So if you're early in your career and you're starting out, focus on technical dedication, work hard, and make sure that you're investing in and continually learning as you go forward. That's going to give you the best results. The other piece I would build on there, and I think this goes for anyone who's maybe moving the career a bit later on, depending on where they might be going into a management, or maybe you just got an interest in security, you want to move into that, is let's not forget most success in your career will be down to the people you meet, the relationships you create, and the way you work as a team and a good communicator. I have that philosophy of make everyone around you successful, because that enables you to engage with the fact that really you are there to make everyone successful and they're there to help you be successful. And by taking that approach, you're going to build friends, have coffee, take part in the night outs and build relationships. That creates conversation. And those people will, if they like you and they have a relationship with you, it's going to create opportunities for you going forward, especially if you stay in an organization for a long time, like I have in my career. Stayed in organizations for a while, so promotion has been related not only performance, but the relationships it create. And as you get to sort of managerial layer and that sort of C-level sort of approach, that becomes even more important in reality. It becomes non-trivial. Yeah, it's actually a skill. And that's the other thing to remember is creating relationships, communication, and so on is not something you're born with. It's actually through your career to do well. And in terms of, say, lateral movement and sidestep and so on, that needs to be a big focus because you're only going to, if you're moving into career later on, you need the people around you to spend more time mentoring you, investing in you and sharing with you so that you can find your feet really quickly because you aren't going to be able to go back 5 years and run yourself with a massive technology history in order to get to that space. So invest in those softer skills as you get later on is actually going to be the differentiator whether you're going to do well or not. think we are. It will make or break you, if I'm honest.
Great advice. So what does the future hold for you?
Yeah, well, look, I work in a fintech which is leading forward, immensely challenging, and incredibly incredibly challenging, shall we say. For me, that stimulates me, that pushes me, and that enables me to attain and be as sharp as possible in terms of giving the maximum amount of value. So one of the things that I pride myself on is that as a professional in InfoSec, you're getting not only leadership and that management ability, but you're getting that massive technical capability. And some organizations really value that. As I go forward in my career, the way I look at it is, and this is how I approached it throughout my entire career, is look, there'll be opportunities that come along because I'm investing in myself and investing in my organization and investing in my abilities. And my advice to anybody actually would be, when an opportunity comes along, you should always look at it and investigate it and understand how it applies into your overall picture and story. Because realistically, I can tell you, everybody around you is doing the same thing. And in reality, everybody's trying to maximize their own potential and their self. And while we live to work 90% of the time, we shouldn't forget that we also work to live at the same time. So there'll be a large part of me making sure I'm living my life as well. So who knows what's ahead of me in the future? Who knows what that might look like? I'm still ambitious. I'm still looking young enough to make sure that I'm prepared to hit the challenges. But in reality, while the organizations I work with are getting value from me and I'm helping them, and we've got a good relationship, I'm sure I'm going to be successful and carry on as I am. So, but who knows? I have no crystal ball. We'll wait and think.
None of us do. But you're certainly still passionate enough, David. So that's come across for sure in our conversation with you today. So thank you. We really have covered some fascinating topics. And for any of our listeners who want to stay connected beyond the CyberConnect community platform, where else can they reach you?
Well, I'm available on LinkedIn. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. That's probably the primary space. I do try and keep a low profile because all the people in my discipline and in my level do attract a certain nefarious crowd. So, but what I would say is I'm available on LinkedIn. I'll post it in the CyberConnect forums as well so people can find me. And I write articles, read, or reach out to me on the CyberConnect app or on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to help people. Like to my original point, make everyone successful, because at the end of the day, we're all working together. We've got a better chance of keeping ahead of the people who are really genuinely, criminals are genuinely not nice people. They are really horrid people. So together we can prevent people from experiencing it.
Well, listen, thank you on behalf of myself and Warren, the community, all our listeners. We certainly trust that you found the value that we hoped you would in today's session. And if anyone wants to continue the discussion or for more sustained engagement, we invite you to join the Secure CyberConnect community. And we're going to be offering a range of collaborative solutions for both technology and security professionals at no cost. These include expansive community access, cross-section mutual mentoring programs, weekly online networking sessions, and a range of exclusive interviews, panel discussions, and masterclasses. If you want to know more and you want to gain access to the Secure CyberConnect community and any of our initiatives, please visit allthews.secure-recruitment.com/cyber-connect/. Thank you for listening.